You've arrived at CozySideAudio, where dreams begin with a story. Whether you're studying, journaling, or just chilling, this one's for you. If you vibe with this kind of content, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe for more.
CozySideAudio presents Mirrors in the Dark. Chapter 1. The Last Flicker. The city never slept. It couldn't, not with the artificial sun suspended above it in the haze of a permanent morning. That light, peach and white with the faintest tremor of static shimmer, poured down the avenues and alleys like a drug drip, flooding every surface with a glow that kept the skyline forever sharp. But not everywhere was equal beneath it. In certain districts, the light faltered, power grids hiccuped, windows dimmed, and sometimes when the lights failed completely, people vanished. Nico Vey had learned to tell the difference between an ordinary outage and the kind that left gaps in the population. Ordinary outages came with complaints, with groans from the old fans struggling to restart, with apartment blocks lighting up a few minutes later once the backups kicked in. The other kind, the blackouts everyone whispered about, arrived quiet. They swallowed the hum of the city, and when the light returned, someone's face would be missing from the crowd. He leaned against the railing of a narrow overpass, recorder balanced in his hand, the artificial dawn spreading weakly across the rooftops below. District 12 stretched out beneath him, tenements stacked like domino bricks, narrow stairwells that funneled heat and garbage smells into the air, neon signage twitching with half-life. He'd been here 3 nights already, chasing a pattern that nobody else at the paper wanted to touch. He spoke into the recorder. Third consecutive night of observation, District 12. Rolling outage lasted 12 minutes. No sign of the municipal response team. Locals report another disappearance yesterday. Woman named Callus Wren, age 31, worked freight at South Dock. Witnesses claim her lights went dead at 0200. Neighbors opened her door at 0208. Empty apartment. No trace. Same as the others. His voice sounded smaller than usual, even to himself. He killed the recorder and slid it into his coat pocket. Around him, the air carried that strange metallic aftertaste he'd come to associate with the blackouts, like chewing on foil. "Hey!" The voice came from behind. He turned and saw a boy, 15, maybe 16, leaning against the rail a few meters away. Loose sweatshirt, threadbare jeans, a too large pair of sneakers that squeaked when he shifted. He had narrow eyes and the kind of haircut people did themselves with a razor and a mirror. "You're the reporter, yeah?" the boy asked. Nico hesitated. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Arel. I live down there." The boy jerked his chin toward the tenements. "You've been hanging around a lot. Thought maybe you'd want to know what people been saying." "That so?" Arel shrugged, looking both ways down the overpass like he expected someone to follow him. "They say the hunters came again, night before last." The word hung between them. Hunters. The first time Nico had heard it was in a dingy cafe, whispered over steaming cups of soy brew. He'd written it off as rumor-mongering until he realized how many people repeated it in the exact same hushed tone. "What do you mean by hunters?" he asked carefully. Arel's sneakers squeaked as he shifted again. "Like copies. People see. Shapes moving when the lights go. Neighbors, friends. Look just like them, but wrong. Too smooth. Don't talk. Just take you by the arms and pull you into the dark. And then when the power comes back, only one's left standing. But no one knows if it's the real one." Nico studied him. "You see this yourself?" The boy's jaw tightened. "My brother." Silence. The endless dawn pressed down on them, hazy and bright, but the boy's face seemed lit from a different angle entirely. "Sorry," Nico said after a moment. "Do you remember when it happened?" 6 weeks ago. Nobody else believes me. They said he probably joined a crew, went off-grid. But I saw them, 2 of him, one screaming, one quiet. When the lights came back, the quiet one was still there, and he looked at me like... Arel cut himself off, shaking his head sharply. "Anyway, you wanted stories. That's mine." Nico pulled his recorder back out. "Can I?" No. Arl's voice hardened. No recordings. Not of me. He tucked the recorder away, raising his hands in a peaceable gesture. Fair enough. Thanks for talking. The boy gave him one last searching look, then turned and pattered off across the overpass, sneakers squeaking with each step. Nico lingered. He wanted to chase the lead, follow the boy, press for more, but instinct told him not to. Kids didn't invent stories about brothers dissolving into shadows, not with that kind of weight in their voices. And besides, the night wasn't over yet. He left the overpass and threaded his way down to the street. District 12 was alive despite its reputation, crowded with stalls selling fried dumplings and repair shops glowing under pale light. Vendors barked prices, drones buzzed overhead carrying packages wrapped in industrial paper. It would look normal to anyone not paying attention, but Nico had been watching long enough to see the edges. The strained way people glanced at street lamps when they flickered, the way conversations died when the light dimmed too long. He bought a coffee from a machine, thick, bitter sludge in a paper cup, and checked his watch. 1:49. The outage last night had started at 1:52. His pulse picked up without his permission. He cut down an alley, its brick walls slick with condensation, and found a vantage point beside a stack of discarded cable spools. From here, he could see 3 separate apartment facades. Windows framed lives, someone cooking noodles, someone shouting at a screen, someone folding laundry. He logged the details in his head like a baseline. The minutes ticked, the city hummed. At 1:53, the hum died. The lights winked out, one by one, like eyes closing. Street lamps dimmed. Neon signage sputtered and died. Apartments went black. The whole district fell into silence so absolute it made his teeth hurt. Even the artificial sun above seemed to dim, though he knew rationally it couldn't. He forced his hand into his coat and pulled the recorder free, clicked it on. His voice trembled as he whispered, "Blackout begins at 1:53, silence complete, ambient temperature drop." A sound interrupted him. Not the hum of generators or the cough of restarting fans. Footsteps, deliberate even, impossibly loud against the silence. He froze. In the window directly across from him, a figure moved. At first he thought it was the tenant returning home. Then the shape stepped closer to the glass, and Nico felt his stomach twist. It was the same man he'd seen earlier cooking noodles in that apartment. The same face, the same posture. But this version's movements were smoother, too precise, like someone mimicking a recording of a human body rather than inhabiting one. The replica lifted a pan from the counter, held it up, and set it back down with mechanical grace. Then it turned toward the door and vanished deeper into the apartment. Nico's breath hitched. He lifted the recorder again, voice barely audible. Subject appears to be. The blackout ended. Light flooded back into the district with a snap, humming machinery roaring awake. Windows glowed, street lamps burned, neon signs hissed alive. The world restored itself in a breath. The man in the apartment was still there, stirring his noodles casually. Same shirt, same posture. But Nico couldn't shake the certainty that it wasn't the same person. Not exactly. He lowered the recorder slowly, palms sweating. For a moment, he thought about walking away, pretending he hadn't seen it, pretending he could go home, file some half-hearted report, and let the city keep its secrets. But then he remembered Arl's face when he said "my brother," remembered the way people whispered hunter-like it might summon them. He whispered to himself, "If the city's rewriting people, I need proof." He stayed until the artificial dawn brightened again, the sky a sickly pink, then began his walk back to the press district. He didn't notice the camera fixed to the corner above the alley, its lens cracked, its indicator light flickering faintly, recording everything. Chapter 2. Rumors in the wires. The newsroom smelled like ink and sweat, though most of the presses had been offline for years. The paper existed mostly as a stream now, articles pushed to readers through filters and feeds, Headlines shrunk down to a crawl of text across billboards. Still, the office clung to old routines, stacks of yellowed newsprint, clattering keyboards, fluorescent strips that buzzed louder than conversation. Nico threaded through the desks with a cup of vending machine coffee in one hand, recorder in the other. He hadn't slept. He'd tried, lying on his cot while the city's endless dawn painted his ceiling with static light, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw that smooth replica moving in the blackout, a man who was both real and not. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling that if he'd waited a few seconds longer, he might have seen what it did next. He stopped at his desk, a cluttered island of wires, notebooks, and battered screen tablets. His editor was already waiting for him, perched on the edge of his chair like a hawk. "You're late," said Ray Alander. She was the kind of editor who still wore collared shirts in a world that had mostly abandoned them. Sleeves rolled up to the elbows, hair tied back so tight it sharpened her face. "You've been circling 12 again, haven't you?" Nico dropped his recorder on the desk. "You sent me there." "I sent you to pull some local color," Ray corrected. "Quotes about bad power management, neglected infrastructure. I didn't ask you to chase bedtime stories." "They're not stories," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." He hesitated, then leaned forward. "I saw one, a replica, during the blackout. A man replaced by something. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't him anymore." The corner of Ray's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You're exhausted. You're letting the district spook you." "Then explain why people keep disappearing, why their apartments reset like nobody ever lived there, why the feeds glitch whenever I pull surveillance footage. That's what happens in a city with 3 layers of corrupt bureaucracy and 10 competing power syndicates. Things break, people vanish, half of them walk off on purpose. You think you've cracked a grand conspiracy, but you're just catching reflections in broken glass." Nico clenched his jaw. He'd expected skepticism, but not dismissal this sharp. "Then let me keep digging, just one more week." "You've already burned 2. Ray sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Fine, a week. But if you come back with more ghost stories, I'm pulling you. I need bodies on politics, not science fiction." He nodded, forcing himself to look grateful. Inside, he felt the old knot of frustration tighten. Ray thought she was protecting him from himself, from chasing after shadows until he burned out. She didn't understand that the shadows were real. He picked up his recorder and left before she could cut the conversation shorter. The city's transit lines ran on time because they had to. Thousands of bodies moved through the tunnels every hour, carried by trains that glowed with artificial daylight. Nico boarded one heading back toward 12, wedged between construction workers in grease-streaked jackets and traders flicking through screens strapped to their wrists. He tried to look casual, but his reflection in the train's window betrayed him. Eyes shadowed, hair in need of a cut, jawline tight with lack of rest. He'd once thought of himself as someone who blended in easily, who could slip through a crowd unnoticed. Now he looked like what he was, a man haunted by something nobody else wanted to see. At the next stop, a familiar figure slid into the seat opposite him. "Long face for a bright morning," said Mara Quinn. Nico blinked. "Didn't expect to see you." Mara shrugged, her coat patched with neon fabric strips that caught the train's overhead light. She was a freelancer, part-time fixer, part-time information dealer. They'd crossed paths years ago on a corporate scandal that had gotten both of them nearly blacklisted. Since then, she'd drifted in and out of his orbit, always with a sly grin and a pocket full of data chips. "You've been sniffing around 12, she said. "That means you're either bored or desperate." "Little of both." Her grin widened. "Then you'll want to hear what I've got." Nico studied her. "What's the catch?" "No catch, just bored." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Rumor is the blackouts aren't random. They're mapped. Some say it's a grid experiment. Others think the city's AI infrastructure is failing. But the juiciest theory, that the outages are scheduled replacements, like clockwork. Every time the lights drop, someone gets rewritten. The word tightened something in Nico's chest. He'd been thinking it privately, afraid to give it voice. Hearing it from her lips made it real. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked. "Undernet boards, encrypted chatter, a few data brokers I have trust, nothing solid. But if you want more, I can get you access. It'll cost." He smirked faintly. "And here I thought you were bored." "Bored, not charitable. You want the keys to the rumor mill, you pay in favors." The train slowed, brakes squealing as it pulled into 12th station. Mara stood and stretched. "Think about it, Nico. The city's always been good at covering its mistakes. Maybe this time the mistake is us." She stepped off, swallowed into the crowd before he could answer. District 12 was restless in daylight. Nico moved through streets packed with merchants selling spare wiring and knockoff software, alleys crowded with old cooling fans buzzing weakly. He found Arel near a food cart, chewing on a fried skewer with the wary eyes of someone who never let his back face the crowd. "You followed me," Nico said. Arel smirked. "You're not hard to find. Reporters walk like they own the ground." "I wanted to ask more about your brother." The smirk vanished. "I told you enough." "I believe you," Nico said. That froze the boy mid-bite. He lowered the skewer slowly. "Most people don't." "I saw it too, last night. Someone replaced." Arel studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the risk of believing. Finally he muttered, "So what are you going to do about it?" "Document, prove it's happening, put it on record before the city erases it." The boy gave a bitter laugh. "Good luck. They already erased my brother. I shout his name in the street. People look at me like he never existed. Even my mother pretends she had only one son, like her memory got patched over." Nico's pulse quickened. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Arel's gaze sharpened. "Or is the city rewriting more than people? Maybe it rewrites the world around them so nobody remembers." The thought made Nico's skin prickle. "Show me his apartment," Nico said. The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but if something happens, it's on you." They climbed to 4 flights in a crumbling tenement, stairwells reeking of old smoke. Arel stopped at a door marked 419, the paint peeling. He pulled out a key, but when he pushed the door open, Nico's stomach lurched. The apartment was spotless, empty. No sign of personal belongings, no posters on the wall, no dishes in the sink. The bed was made with sheets so crisp they looked unused. It was the same eerie reset he'd seen before. "He lived here," Arel said fiercely. "We grew up in this room. Now it looks like a rental nobody wants." Nico walked slowly through, recorder in hand. He whispered descriptions. "Unit 419, apartment reset, all personal effects erased, no trace of prior occupancy." Arel clenched his fists. They didn't just take him, they took proof he was ever here. Nico touched the wall. For a moment he thought he felt a faint vibration, like a low electric hum before it faded. The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "If they can erase someone like that, how do you know it hasn't happened to you already?" Nico looked at him sharply. "What if you're not the first you? What if you've been replaced 3 times and never knew?" The words left a cold pit in his chest. He forced himself to steady his breathing, to remember his own memories, his own scars, but doubt had already slithered in. He turned off the recorder. "We'll find proof, somewhere." Arel didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the window where the street lamps outside flickered once, briefly in the middle of day. Both of them froze. It was only a glitch, the light steadying a second later. But Nico thought about Mara's words, scheduled replacements, like clockwork. And for the first time, he wondered not just if he could prove what was happening, but if he had enough time left before the city rewrote him too. Chapter 3. The Blackout Zone. The city's artificial sun never dimmed, but in District 12, light had become a negotiable thing. Nico stood at the edge of what locals called the blackout zone, 5 square blocks where outages struck more often, where the utility drones didn't bother to hover, and where even the city's billboards dimmed to gray. It was early, but already the air hummed with unease. Shop fronts displayed racks of cheap lanterns, candles, jury-rigged light strips powered by scavenged cells. Everyone carried something to cut through the dark. Arl was waiting beside a shuttered clinic, his hood pulled low. He carried a flashlight duct taped to a copper pipe. The boy looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Nico admitted. "But if we don't go in, we've got nothing but stories." Arl gave a crooked smile. "Stories are safer." They moved into the zone. At first, the streets looked ordinary. Cracked pavement, stacked apartments, smells of frying oil and sewage mingling in the warm air. But the deeper they walked, the more wrongness pressed in. Windows were dark even when power elsewhere still flowed. Surveillance cameras on the corners rotated jerkily, as if their programming stuttered. And there was silence, thick, heavy silence. Even the hum of cooling units seemed quieter here. Nico raised his recorder, speaking softly. Entering affected grid, ambient noise unusually low, infrastructure behaving erratically. Arl muttered, "Like it knows we're here." They crossed a plaza where concrete statues of laborers once stood. Now the plinths were empty, their bases scrubbed clean. No plaques, no marks of removal, just blank stone, as if nothing had ever stood there at all. Nico touched the smooth surface. It was too clean, too seamless. They erased more than people. Arl gave him a hard look. "I told you, my brother, our apartment, they don't leave gaps." Before Nico could answer, a low buzz rolled through the air, like a distant power surge. Street lamps overhead flickered. "Blackout," Arl whispered. The world stuttered. For one sickening second, everything lost definition. Colors drained into pale shades, edges blurred, sound thickened into a low hum. Nico staggered, clutching his recorder like an anchor. Then the lights snapped off. Darkness rushed in, complete and suffocating. Even the endless artificial dawn outside the district seemed cut off. Nico's chest tightened. He fumbled for his flashlight, thumb shaking on the switch. The beam cut through the dark in a narrow cone, catching dust in the air. Arl's voice trembled. "Don't look behind you." Nico froze, his breath clouded in front of him. Slowly, against his better judgment, he turned. Something stood at the far end of the plaza, a silhouette shaped exactly like him. The replica didn't move, it simply stood, posture unnervingly calm, head tilted slightly to one side as if studying him. Its stillness was more terrifying than any attack. Arl's light flicked nervously across the concrete. When it landed on the figure, it revealed nothing but empty air. But when the beam shifted away, the silhouette returned, sharper now, closer. "It's in the dark," Nico whispered. The boy's grip tightened on his pipe. "Then don't let the light go out." They stumbled through alleys, every flicker of shadow hiding something that might be them. Nico kept his flashlight steady, but the batteries whined. Each breath was a countdown. Once, at the mouth of a side street, they both saw a figure drag another body into the dark. For a second, the flashlight caught the victim's face, wide-eyed, screaming silently, and the hand that gripped him. The hand belonged to the same face. Arl cursed under his breath. "They're everywhere." "Keep moving." They reached the husk of an old power substation. Its doors hung crooked, rusted hinges screeching as Nico shoved them open. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and mildew. Banks of dead monitors lined the walls, cables snaking across the floor like roots. Arl shone his light over the equipment. "Think we'll find answers here?" "We'll find something," Nico said, though doubt gnawed at him. He crouched by a console, brushing dust from the surface. The key still worked, faint lights glowing when touched. He jacked in his recorder, hoping to siphon any residual data. Lines of corrupted code crawled across the display. Shards of surveillance logs, incomplete timestamps, ghosted images of streets. Then the feed stabilized. On screen, a grainy video showed the plaza outside. The timestamp read 10 minutes earlier. Nico's throat tightened as he watched himself and Arel enter the frame. The footage showed them moving cautiously, lights sweeping. Then, abruptly, the image split. Two Nicos stood where one had been. The replica moved smoothly, confidently, while the original flinched and staggered. Arel's figure on screen didn't seem to notice. Nico's stomach dropped. He muttered, "That's not possible." "It's not real," Arel said, but his voice cracked. The video ended with static. The blackout outside lifted a moment later. Light bled back in through the broken windows. Nico and Arel both exhaled ragged breaths. But the unease didn't leave. If anything, the light only made the shadows feel sharper. On their way out of the zone, they passed a row of shuttered storefronts. One still bore the ghost of painted letters, though the words were smeared into nothing. Nico stopped, staring at the half-erased signage. "What is it?" Arel asked. "I used to come here," Nico murmured. "There was a diner, cheap coffee, cracked leather booths. I wrote my first stories here." Arel frowned. "This place has been empty for years." Nico shook his head. "No, I remember the owner. He called me kid, even though I was 20. Said the city only remembers what it wants to." The boy gave him a look that was half pity, half fear. "Maybe it already started with you." The thought landed like a blade in his chest. He almost argued, but the words felt fragile on his tongue. Instead, he switched off his recorder and slipped it into his pocket. The weight of it felt heavier than ever. That night, back in his apartment, Nico played the corrupted footage again. Watching his double move with such certainty, such practiced calm, while he stumbled like a shadow of himself. He paused the frame. The replica's eyes seemed to look directly into the lens. Confident. Real. He touched his own face, feeling the stubble on his jaw, the tremor in his hand. What if Arel was right? What if he wasn't the first Nico Vare to walk these streets? And what if the city had already decided he wouldn't be the last? Chapter 4. A shadow in the glass. The city never slept, but it did blink. Knox kept returning to that thought as he replayed the footage again, slowing the frames until each movement became a stutter of light and shadow. The woman, Kayla Reese, 28, last seen leaving her apartment in Sector 10, walked calmly into the corridor. She paused mid-stride, tilting her head as though she heard something outside the edge of the camera's lens, then she stiffened. Her double stepped into frame from the opposite side, a mirror with subtle dissonance. Same black jacket, same braid over the shoulder, same faint scar across her lip. But the gait was heavier, too exact, not mimicry, not disguise. It was her. The second Kayla reached out, fingers blurring for an instant like corrupted pixels, and dragged the original off-screen. There was no sound but the dull hum of the surveillance mic picking up the electrical systems groaning against the blackout. Knox leaned back, the chair creaking. His reflection stared at him in the darkened monitor, and for a moment he imagined the glass might shift, that something might step through, wearing his face. He rubbed his eyes. The air in his flat smelled of old coffee and ozone from the failing transformer 3 floors below. "Same pattern," he muttered. "Same overwrite." He pulled open his desk drawer and fished out the case files, loose sheets and half-burned notes clipped together by desperation. 12 vanishings confirmed in the last month, all tied to rolling blackouts, all captured in pieces by failing surveillance systems. Every single one involved a replica. The problem wasn't proof. The problem was convincing anyone to care. The city hummed as Knox stepped into the street. Overhead, the endless dawn blazed through the smog dome, its engineered sunlight flickering faintly like an unstable signal. Sector 10 still carried the scent of ozone and scorched circuits. Tower shadows stretched like teeth across streets lined with shuttered stalls and malfunctioning holo ads. He lit a cigarette, the ember bright against the pallor of the district. He didn't smoke out of habit, only when his nerves felt sharp enough to cut him from the inside. Tonight, they were razors. He wasn't the only one awake. The power had returned to parts of the district, but fear lingered like mold. A boy no older than 12 crouched near a vending unit, shaking it until a can dropped free. His eyes met Knox's, wide, hollow, already too old. "Go home," Knox told him. The boy didn't move. "Don't go out when it's dark," he whispered instead. Then he darted down an alley before Knox could respond. The words hit harder than they should. Children always carried truths the city tried to bury. By the time Knox reached the corner of Grell and Venn, the blackout scars were obvious. Entire blocks hummed with the dead power grids. Street lamps stuttered, their glow breaking into fragments. A shape leaned against a wall under one of the flickering lights. Zaira. Her leather coat gleamed wet from the mist, her pale hair falling unevenly over one eye. She was smaller than him, but carried herself like someone who'd spent her life walking into places no sane person would. Her arms were folded, but her eyes, gray, sharp, were restless. "You're late," she said. "I had to confirm the footage. And?" "Same as the others. Copycat, perfect down to the scar." "Scar?" Kayla Reese split her lip on a bar fight 2 years back. Replica had it too. Zaira's jaw tightened. "Then it's not mimicry." "No." Knox flicked ash onto the street. "It's replacement." A silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. "Finally," she said, "the grid authority knows more than they're saying. No blackout this consistent is random. Something's feeding." "You've got proof?" "Not yet, but I know where to find some." Her gaze flicked down the street. Knox followed it. At the far end, beyond the busted tram line, a squat building sat behind wire fencing. Its sign, half-lit, read, "Sector 10, Substation 34B. Authorized entry only." Knox ground out his cigarette. Figures. They breached the fence under cover of static. The dawn light above dimmed faintly, the smog pulsing like a living lung. Zaira clipped the lock with practiced ease, slipping inside with cat-like precision. Knox followed, the back of his neck crawling. The substation reeked of coolant and damp wiring. Rows of humming panels lined the walls, their indicators sputtering in half-lit red. Screens flickered with diagnostic readouts, though most lines pulsed error in stuttering green text. "What are we looking for?" Knox whispered. "Logs, system outputs, anything showing why power cuts keep lining up with the disappearances." She crouched near a terminal, fingers dancing over corroded keys. The monitor spat static before spooling lines of code. Zaira's face caught the glow, her features hard in concentration. Knox paced the aisle, unease crawling deeper. The hum wasn't right. It vibrated not just in the air but inside him, like the room itself was resonating with his pulse. "Got it," Zaira muttered. "Look at this." He leaned over. The logs displayed timestamps of rolling outages, each corresponding exactly to a recorded disappearance. But layered between them were strings of corrupted entries, lines repeating fragments of phrases. "Entry corrupted. Restore pattern. Entry corrupted. Overwrite complete. Entry corrupted. Host accepted." Knox felt his throat tighten. This isn't grid language. No, it's something writing inside the system. Before he could answer, a sound cut through the hum. Footsteps. They froze. A corridor stretched into darkness at the far end of the substation. From it came the rhythm of boots against metal, steady, deliberate. A figure stepped into the half-light. Kayla Reese. Her braid hung over her shoulder. Her jacket was the same as in the footage, but her face was expressionless, skin waxen under the glow. Her eyes fixed directly on Knox, unblinking. He swallowed. "That's not possible." Zaira's hand went to her concealed pistol. "Don't move." The replica. Kayla didn't obey. She stepped forward, every motion too smooth, too mechanical. The hum of the substation rose in pitch, syncing with her steps. Then she opened her mouth. What came out wasn't her voice. "Host accepted." The words were flat, digital, as though spoken through a broken speaker. Knox felt cold wash through him. Zaira raised the pistol. The replica moved faster than thought. Chaos erupted. Zaira fired, two sharp cracks that ricocheted off steel, but the figure blurred, her limbs bending wrong, her movement skipping like a corrupted video file. The bullet struck, but the replica didn't slow. Knox shoved a panel cart between them. The thing's hand shot out, fingers warping, stretching, reaching like strands of liquid glass. They missed his throat by inches, embedding into the metal cart with a hiss. "Move!" Zaira shouted. They bolted down the aisle, the hum screaming in their bones. Panels flickered, lights surged, sparks rained as the system itself seemed to react. The replica's steps were everywhere, echoing off walls, disjointed in time. They reached the service hatch and burst into the night air. Rain hit Knox's face like knives, the city above glowing pale. Behind them, the substation's lights strobed wildly. The replica didn't follow. The hum cut off. Knox bent over, gasping. Zaira's pistol smoked in her hand. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. Knox forced himself to answer. His voice was raw. "Not just replacement," he said. "Integration. The city's not just overwriting people, it's using them." Zaira looked back at the substation. The glow flickered inside like lightning trapped in a box. "Then it's already started," she whispered. And for the first time, Knox believed it. Chapter 5, Fault Lines. The rain hadn't stopped. Sector 10 glistened as though the city itself were sweating, streets gleaming with a sheen of oil and neon reflections that pulsed faintly from flickering holo ads. Knox pulled his coat tighter and kept his head down, but the air still carried the metallic sting of storm runoff and sparking transformers. His boots splashed through shallow puddles, each step punctuating the silence that had settled between him and Zaira. They hadn't spoken since the substation, not about what they'd seen, not about the words still echoing in their bones. Host accepted. He tried to push the phrase out of his mind, but it returned in cycles, like the refrain of a song he never wanted to hear again. His hand shook as he lit another cigarette. The embers' glow blurred against the rain before hissing out. "You're wasting those," Zaira said finally. Her tone was flat, not scolding, just observation. Knox flicked the useless butt into the gutter. "Better wasted than needed." "You're shaking." "Maybe I should be." They stopped under the overhang of a shuttered noodle stall. The awning sagged with water, dripping rhythmically into the street. The glow from a nearby sign sputtered above them. Noodles B0WL open 24 hours. Though the doors were locked tight, another casualty of fear spreading through the blackout zones. Zaira leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You think anyone will believe us?" Knox barked a laugh, too sharp. "You mean the footage of Kayla dragging Kayla? Or the thing that tried to—" He broke off, his throat constricting. He shook his head. "No, nobody's ready to believe the city's eating itself alive." Her gray eyes narrowed. "Then we make them ready." They took refuge in Knox's flat, the walls humming faintly with the constant presence of machinery in the building's guts. The place smelled like rain and old ink, stacks of files spilling across the table, each folder stuffed with clippings, transcripts, and handwritten notes. Zaira dropped into the chair opposite him, stretching out stiff legs. Her coat was slick with water, and her hair clung damp to her cheek. Knox poured them both something from a cracked bottle he'd been saving, not out of celebration, but necessity. "Let's talk through it," she said, piece by piece, no panic, just facts. Knox stared into his glass, the liquid trembling faintly in his grip. Then he nodded. Fact 1, the disappearances line up exactly with the rolling blackouts. Fact 2, the replicas are perfect. Too perfect, down to scars and flaws. Fact 3. The substation logs. They didn't just fail, they were corrupted, and the corruption was talking. Zaira ticked each off with a finger, her voice steady but eyes tight. And fact 4. Whatever we saw in that substation wasn't just pretending to be Kayla. It was integrated with the system. It moved when the hum rose. It stopped when the hum died. Knox exhaled smoke. So the city's grid isn't failing, it's being used. Blackouts aren't accidents, they're feeding windows. The words hung heavy between them. Finally, Zaira said, then we need to know what it's feeding into. The investigation widened. By day, the city continued its charade of endless artificial dawn, sunlight filtering through the smog dome like watered-down honey. But in Sector 10, shadows pooled in corners no light could quite reach. Word of mouth spread faster than the official feeds, whispers of people vanishing in the dark, of shapes moving behind glass, of neighbors who weren't themselves. Knox listened. He wandered through markets, alleys, half-lit cafes, collecting fragments. A man swore he'd seen his brother walking into their apartment building minutes after he'd already gone inside. A woman claimed her child woke her in the night, pointing at the window where another version of him stood, watching. None of it made the public channels. The feeds ran stories about grid repairs, about scheduled outages for infrastructure optimization. The word overwrite never surfaced. They're burying it, Knox muttered, tossing another official statement onto his desk. Zaira was tracing blackout locations across a map. Her lines formed a pattern, not random clusters, but a slow spiral, tightening toward the district's center. They're herding, she said. Herding what? She didn't answer. The break came when a contact called from inside the grid authority. Knox didn't trust Callan by default. He trusted no one inside the system, but the man had fed him scraps before, and desperation made for strange allies. They met at a bar half dead from neglect, its neon sign flickering blue mirror instead of blue mirror. Callan was jittery, his thin frame swallowed by a corporate-issued jacket he hadn't even bothered to button. He nursed a glass of something clear and didn't look Knox in the eye. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered. "And if anyone asks, we never met." Knox slid into the booth across from him. Zaira lingered near the entrance, her presence enough to keep strays away. "Spill," Knox said. Callan glanced around, lowered his voice. "They're calling it a synchronization event. That's the phrase in the memos, not blackouts, not outages, synchronization, like something's trying to align with the grid." Knox's stomach turned. Align how? Like a handshake protocol, only backwards. Instead of systems syncing with each other, it's syncing with people. The glass trembled in Callan's grip. And it's not just Sector 10 anymore. They've logged anomalies in other districts. Quietly, of course, suppressed, but the spiral's growing. Knox leaned in, voice low. "What happens when it finishes aligning?" Callan's eyes darted toward the door, his voice barely audible. "Then the city won't need us anymore." He stood abruptly, left his drink untouched, and walked out. Knox stared after him, bile rising in his throat. That night, the blackout struck earlier than expected. Knox and Zaira were still in the streets, heading back from the meeting. The artificial dawn above dimmed, then guttered like a dying filament. For a heartbeat, true night fell across Sector 10, a rarity no one had seen in decades. The silence was worse than the dark. Then came the sound. Boots. Dozens of them. Knox's pulse spiked. He grabbed Zaira's arm and pulled her into a side alley just as figures emerged from the haze. Perfect replicas, their movements jittered by half seconds, as if the world lagged when they walked. Faces familiar, yet wrong. Neighbors, strangers, maybe even people who hadn't yet vanished. They moved in formation, blank-eyed, mouths whispering fragments of corrupted code. Overwrite complete. Restore pattern. Host accepted. Knox's breath came ragged. His reflection in a shattered window seemed to twitch separately, its mouth forming words he didn't speak. Zaira pressed a hand to his shoulder, her whisper sharp as a blade. "We can't outrun them." "Then what?" "We hide in plain sight." Before he could question her, she stepped into the flickering light. The replicas turned, their eyes locking onto her. For a heartbeat, the alley swam with tension. Then, impossibly, they shifted formation and walked past her, as though she were one of them. Knox's skin prickled. He forced himself to follow, stepping into the open. For a terrible moment, one replica's face turned toward his. It was his own. The copy's lips parted, and in Knox's voice it whispered, "Not yet." Then it was gone, swallowed by the dark. Later, safe. Or what passed for safe? Back in his flat, Knox sat trembling. Zaira poured 2 glasses with steady hands, though her eyes betrayed a storm. "They didn't take us," he said. "Not yet. They knew." She met his gaze, unflinching. Of course they knew. The city knows its own reflection. Knox downed the drink, the burn grounding him only slightly. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window. He didn't trust it anymore. The city wasn't blinking. It was watching. Chapter 6. Shattered Mirrors. The glass in Knox's flat rattled. Not from wind or passing trains, but from the low, throbbing hum that had begun in the walls hours ago and refused to stop. It resonated like a pulse through concrete and steel, a vibration that made his teeth ache and his head swim. He hadn't slept, not really. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the substation feed, his own reflection staring at him with calm, steady certainty, lips moving to words he never said. Not yet. Knox dragged his palms down his face. The mirror in the bathroom seemed to breathe with him. Each exhale fogged the glass longer than it should, lingering like something alive. "From the main room," Zaira's voice cut through. "We need to move." He turned. She was dressed already, coat buttoned, boots laced. The expression she wore was her default mask, hard, controlled, but there was a strain beneath it. "Where?" he asked, his voice rough. "Grid Authority's local branch. If Callan was right, the spiral's expanding, and that means their data vaults are stacked with evidence, maybe even answers." Knox snorted, and probably locked down harder than the central dome. "That's why we move now, while they're still underestimating how much we know." He hesitated, glancing again at the bathroom mirror. His reflection seemed a fraction late, just slow enough that it hurt to notice. He looked away. "Fine," he muttered. "But if we're walking into a noose, you're cutting first." Zaira gave him the faintest flicker of a smile. "Deal." The authorities' local office squatted on the edge of Sector 10 like a parasite clinging to the city's veins. From the outside, it resembled nothing more than a dull concrete block. No neon signs, no architectural flourishes, just cameras on every corner and doors that looked like they'd crush anyone who tried them without clearance. The plaza around it was nearly empty. A few workers hurried past with collars turned high, never looking too long at the building. Everyone knew not to linger here. Zaira scanned the perimeter. Main entrance is suicide, but every vault has a maintenance line, cooling ducts, fiber conduits, something small. Knox raised a brow. Small as in crawl space, or small as in rat tunnel? Both. He groaned. You always pick the glamorous jobs. Still, he followed her to the alley where the utility hatches clustered. A rusted panel sat half buried under grime. Zaira crouched, produced a slender tool from her coat, and made quick work of the lock. The hatch yawned open, revealing darkness that smelled of dust and ozone. "After you," she said. "Chivalry's dead," he muttered, lowering himself inside. The tunnel was cramped, forcing them onto hands and knees. Pipes sweated overhead, dripping lukewarm condensation onto the back of Knox's neck. His flashlight beam jittered with each movement, painting narrow slices of concrete wall and thick cable runs. They moved deeper, the sound of their crawling amplified in the narrow passage. At one point, Knox froze, swearing he heard another set of movements ahead, soft, deliberate, keeping pace. But when he swung the light forward, the tunnel stretched empty. "Keep going," Zyra whispered behind him. He did, but every nerve screamed. The duct opened into a crawlspace above the data floor. Through the vent grate, Knox could see rows of servers humming faintly, their blue indicators glowing like constellations in the dark. A pair of guards patrolled below, rifles slung across their chests, their movements mechanical. Zyra's breath warmed his ear. "We wait for a gap, then drop." He nodded, pulse hammering. The guards moved past the far end of the room. Zyra eased the grate loose with surgical precision, set it aside, and lowered herself silently onto the server bank below. Knox followed, boots barely making a sound as he landed. They slipped between the machines, their whir masking soft footsteps. Knox plugged a data spike into a port and linked his recorder. Lines of encrypted text scrolled, jagged and corrupted in places. He began sifting. Come on," he muttered. Zyra kept watch, eyes scanning the shadows. Then the screen shifted. Anomalies filled the logs, blackout timings, spiral projections, event designations. One word repeated again and again, synchronization. Knox dug deeper. Attached files opened with grainy surveillance captures. People walking down streets, then doubling mid-frame. Two bodies occupying the same space until one jittered, blurred, and vanished. The survivor walked on, never glancing back. Another file showed workers inside the authority itself. A technician bent over a console, and then, seamlessly, another technician emerged from his shadow, straightened, and took his place. The first flickered, collapsed like static, gone. No one reacted. Knox's throat dried. He copied everything to his recorder. Then the humming rose. Not from the servers, from the air. The lights dimmed, flickered, and in their place, a faint chorus whispered, "Restore pattern, host accepted, restore pattern." Knox's hands trembled on the recorder. Zyra spun, her gun raised. The guards below had stopped, their faces turned upward in perfect unison, eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. And from the far corner of the room, a third figure stepped out, Knox himself. The replica's movements were fluid, precise, its gaze locked directly onto him, lips curling in a faint, knowing smile. Zyra hissed, "Move!" Knox ripped the spike free. They sprinted through the aisles, the whispers swelling. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, converging ahead of them, cutting off escape routes. The replica Knox didn't run. It simply walked, as though it knew exactly where they'd end up. They burst into a side corridor, alarms finally screaming. Red emergency strobes painted the walls, each flash catching glimpses of doubles. Technicians, guards, even passers-by, some real, some not. They overlapped in stuttering loops, phasing in and out of sync. "Zyra!" Knox gasped. "They're not just copies, they're replacements. Keep running." They slammed through a final hatch and into the storm outside, the artificial dawn glitching overhead in pale, jagged strobes. The sound followed them, footsteps, whispers, the hum of a city trying to overwrite itself. Back at the flat, soaked and shaking, Knox collapsed into a chair. His recorder still pulsed faintly, evidence safely inside. Zyra poured water, slid him a glass, then sat across from him, her own hands trembling despite her calm mask. "We can't just expose this," Knox said hoarsely. "If people see, if they realize anyone could be a copy, they'll burn the city down," Zyra finished. "Or worse, accept it." Silence. Only the hum in the walls remained. Finally, Zyra leaned forward, voice low. "So the question is, Knox, when they come again, and they will, how do we prove we're still us?" Knox looked into his glass. His reflection stared back, steady, unblinking. He wasn't sure he could answer. Chapter 7. shifting silhouettes. The storm passed in the morning, leaving behind air that smelled metallic, as if the city itself had bled. Rain had washed dust from the neon signs, but many remained unlit, flickering like dying nerves. In Marrow District, power still hadn't returned in full. Half the streets glowed with the artificial dawn overhead. The other half sank into a hushed twilight, shadows overlapping in ways that made it impossible to tell where one ended and another began. Canaan walked quickly, hood pulled over his head, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself, his copy, standing in a doorway, face expressionless, waiting for the lights to die. He burned through packs like lifelines, inhaling shallow, nervous drags, his chest aching from the acrid smoke. He had stopped checking his messages. Arden had left 6 missed calls he couldn't bear to answer. It wasn't that he didn't want to hear her voice. It was that he feared hearing her voice distorted, repeating words she hadn't spoken, a glitch in the line. The thought made his throat close. He crossed into the blackout zone. At once, the air shifted, pressing close, thick. The hum of power lines ended abruptly, leaving silence that was almost too loud. Storefronts were shuttered, windows boarded. A cat darted across his path, its eyes glowing pale green in the dark, before vanishing under a car. Canaan quickened his pace. He was headed for the archive bunker again, though he didn't know why. It had become a reflex, like a moth returning to flame. The bunker's walls promised something solid, a place where the city's endless rewrites couldn't reach. At least, that's what he told himself. Inside, he found Arden already waiting. She had lit 6 lanterns, setting them in a circle, as though preparing a ritual. Her face looked sharper in the glow, cheekbones drawn, shadows deep beneath her eyes. She glanced up when he entered. "You came back," she said simply. "Of course I did." His voice cracked from lack of sleep. "You almost didn't. I thought maybe—" She cut herself off. "Never mind." He sank into a chair across from her. "You've been watching more footage." "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "I can't stop." Canaan rubbed his forehead. "What did you find this time?" Arden leaned forward, sliding a tablet across the table. On its screen, grainy footage from a corner camera. A blackout hit, the street lamp snuffed out. Pedestrians froze like insects startled. And then, shapes moved between them, shapes identical to them. A woman pulled backward by her mirror image, a man screaming silently as his double gripped his arms. The footage stuttered, skipping frames, and then in the final second, one of the doubles turned toward the camera. It was Arden's face. Canaan shoved the tablet away as though it burned. I know." Her voice was steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. "I'm already in the system. Or it's already building me. I don't know which." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was some glitch in the archive, that none of this was real. But the words withered before they reached his tongue. Arden's gaze fixed on him. "Do you ever feel it? Like your reflection isn't quite right anymore?" Canaan hesitated. He remembered shaving it 2 mornings ago, staring into the cracked mirror above his sink. For a moment, his reflection had seemed delayed, blinking a second after he did. He'd smashed the mirror with his fist, cutting his knuckles, but the memory lingered, a splinter in his brain. "Yes," he whispered. They sat in silence for a long time, the lanterns flickering between them. The bunker smelled of damp concrete and smoke. Outside, faint thunder rolled again, though the storm had already passed. Finally, Arden spoke. "I think the city's rebuilding us, piece by piece. Whenever the light falters, it tests how well we fit into its script." "And the hunters?" Canaan asked. "They're not hunters," she said. Her voice softened, though the words carried a terrible certainty. "They're collectors. They're making sure no fragments remain. If you're overwritten, you can't leave scraps behind." Canaan shivered. He looked down at his hands. For a moment, he thought he saw them blur at the edges like static. He clenched his fists until his nails bit skin. "I want to get out," he said suddenly. "Leave Marrow, leave this city." Arden gave a short, hollow laugh. "Where would you go? The dawn follows everywhere. There's nowhere beyond its reach." "Maybe." His voice trembled. "But I'd rather die trying to outrun it than sit here waiting to vanish." Her expression flickered, conflicted. "And if it follows us too?" Canaan stood pacing, running both hands through his hair. "Then at least we'll know it isn't just this district. At least we'll know the truth." Arden leaned back, eyes following him. "Truth doesn't save you, Canaan. It only marks you." They argued until their throats went raw. About escape routes. About whether the overwrites could cross daylight zones. About whether the surveillance system was an accomplice or merely an observer. The debate spiraled, circling the same dread, never resolving. At last, exhausted, they fell silent again. The lantern sputtered. Canaan froze. Arden did too. The light dimmed, guttered, and for a single breathless instant, the bunker sank into absolute black. In that instant, Canaan felt fingers brush his shoulder, cold, familiar, his own fingers. Then the lanterns flared back to life. He spun. No one stood behind him. Arden's face had gone pale, eyes locked on his arm. "Canaan," she whispered, "look." He followed her gaze. On his sleeve, faint but visible, was a smear of ash-gray handprint. His own handprint. Chapter 8: The Hollow Hours. The blackout had lasted less than a second, but to Canaan it stretched like a year. He kept replaying that moment in his head, the suffocating dark, the weightless press of silence, the touch on his shoulder, his own touch. The smear on his sleeve was still there, faint but undeniable, even after he had tried scrubbing it with water until his skin burned. He didn't tell Arden he had heard a whisper too, a voice so low it was almost beneath sound. It had spoken his name in the exact cadence he used when thinking to himself. That detail felt too fragile to say aloud, like confessing it would make it more real. Now, 2 days later, the lanterns still burned in the bunker, their fuel nearly gone. Neither he nor Arden had left for longer than an hour at a time. The city above felt hostile, charged with unseen static. Every street carried echoes of motion, reflections rippling in glass even when no one walked nearby. Arden kept working. She sat hunched over her consoles, eyes rimmed red, hair tied back in a hasty knot. Her hands shook when she typed, but she didn't stop. The bunker was littered with half-empty water bottles, food wrappers, and stacks of copied footage she'd pulled from different surveillance feeds. Canaan watched from across the room. He wanted to ask her how she still functioned, what kept her moving forward when the world outside was unraveling. Instead, he said, "You haven't slept." "Neither have you," she answered, not looking up. "That's different. I don't have your brain." Her mouth twitched. "Flattery won't save you." It wasn't flattery. Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes, bloodshot as they were, seemed sharper than before. "Then what was it?" Canaan hesitated. "Acknowledgement, maybe." She blinked, then returned to her screens. "Acknowledgement doesn't save you either." They let silence settle again. Outside, faint rumbles of machinery drifted from the city above, uneven and hollow, like the sound of breathing that wasn't human. When Arden finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. "The footage repeats now." "What do you mean?" She slid a tablet across the table. On it played a feed from a pedestrian intersection, empty, then filled, then empty again. After 30 seconds, it reset. The same man crossed with the same stride. The same woman checked her watch, tapping her foot in the exact rhythm. "It loops," Canaan said. "Not just this one." She tapped a command. More feeds appeared, from different streets, different angles. Each played for 30 seconds, then snapped back to the start, repeating endlessly. "Glitch?" he asked, though the word felt hollow. Arden shook her head. "Pattern? The city isn't recording anymore, it's projecting." His chest tightened. Projecting what? Us, everyone. The city is rewriting in real time and filling the gaps with copies that move like they're supposed to. She leaned back, pressing her palms to her eyes. Maybe that's what the hunters are, not collectors. Cleanup. Canaan felt his breath falter. Cleanup for what? For when the projections falter, for when something breaks out of the script. They stared at each other, the weight of it crushing. Suddenly the bunker lights flickered. Both of them tensed, hands reaching instinctively for lanterns. The bulb steadied after a few seconds, but the warning was enough. Arden pushed away from her desk. We need proof outside this bunker, something the city can't overwrite. What are you suggesting? Physical records, paper, ink, anything analog. There's an old press office in Vela Ward, pre-Dawn Tech. They used to keep archives on hard print. If anything survived, it's there. Canaan swallowed. That's 4 districts away. She nodded, which means blackouts between here and there, which means we don't walk, we run. His throat went dry. And if one of them, then we don't stop to ask questions. Her voice cracked for the first time. If one of them touches us, we don't come back. Canaan tried to laugh, but it came out broken. You make it sound easy. Nothing about this is easy, she said, but staying here is worse. They set out at dusk when the endless dawn overhead was dim enough to feel almost like real night. Canaan carried a crowbar he'd found near a service tunnel. Arden had a flashlight and a battered satchel stuffed with notes. They walked quickly, keeping close to walls, avoiding reflective surfaces where possible. The city felt hollow. Streets echoed with their footsteps more loudly than they should. Windows reflected them at odd angles, sometimes showing expressions neither of them were making. Once, passing a darkened cafe, Canaan caught sight of himself in the glass. Only his reflection didn't walk when he did. It stood motionless, staring, mouth opening slowly as though to scream. He looked away and didn't mention it. Crossing into the second district, the power flickered. Street lamps guttered, then failed, plunging them into shadow. Run, Arden hissed. They sprinted. The flashlight beam jerked wildly across cracked pavement and graffiti-smeared walls. Behind them, Canaan heard the sound of footsteps matching their pace, but heavier, more deliberate. He didn't dare look. They rounded a corner, lungs burning. The lamps ahead flared back to life, the blackout ending. The footsteps behind them stopped instantly. Canaan staggered against the wall, chest heaving. Arden pressed her back to the opposite wall, face pale but fierce. They don't follow past the light, she whispered. He wiped sweat from his forehead with shaking hands. But they wait. They kept moving. The city shifted around them in subtle ways, the color of signs changing mid-step, alleys appearing where none had been a moment before. Once they passed a man standing still on the sidewalk, eyes blank. He blinked too slowly, like a video buffering. Neither spoke to him. By the time they reached the edge of Vela Ward, their legs felt like lead. The ward was half dead, filled with gutted factories and abandoned offices. The artificial dawn overhead glowed weaker here, as though the city had forgotten this place. The press office loomed at the far end of a cracked plaza. Its windows were boarded, doors chained. A faded sign still clung to the front, the Vela Gazette. Canaan pushed against the door until the chain snapped. They slipped inside. The air was stale, filled with dust and old paper. Their flashlight caught rows of filing cabinets, stacks of yellowed print, broken typewriters. It smelled like another era. Arden's face lit with something like hope. If anything survived, it'll be here. Canaan swept the beam of light across the walls. Dozens of photographs hung crooked, their glass cracked. All were portraits of employees, editors, journalists, printers. And in every single one, the eyes had been scratched out. Chapter 9. Ink that doesn't fade. The Gazette smelled like rot disguised as dust, as though the building itself had tried to mummify its history. Every step they took stirred the air that hadn't moved in decades. Lantern light and the thin beam of Arden's flashlight fought against the darkness, carving narrow tunnels of visibility in a cavern of shadow. The scratched-out portraits loomed over them, hollow-eyed stares following wherever they moved. Canaan felt it in his ribs, an ache like guilt he couldn't name. Arden was already rifling through a cabinet, fingers leaving trails in the dust. If anything survived, it'll be buried under years of neglect. Help me. Canaan hesitated, still staring at the ruined photographs. Why scratch the eyes? She didn't look up. Eyes are identifiers, windows. If the city rewrites faces, maybe someone thought erasing the windows kept the originals intact. Her words rang like half-truths. Canaan reached out to one of the frames, tracing the gouges. The scratches hadn't been random. They were deliberate, carved deep as though someone wanted to hurt the image, not just obscure it. Or maybe someone couldn't stand to look at themselves anymore, he murmured. Arden didn't answer. They searched in silence, the scrape of drawers and rusted hinges filling the room. Canaan found stacks of yellowed newsprint, headlines about protests, economic collapse, and the construction of the dawn grid. The words blurred when he tried to focus too long. Here, Arden said suddenly. She'd pried open a cabinet at the back, inside of which sat bound ledgers, thick leather covers, ink that had bled into the paper over time. She pulled one free, coughing at the cloud of dust. They crouched together on the floor, lantern between them, flipping pages. The ledger wasn't news, it was records, schedules, lists of staff rotations, delivery logs. But scrawled between the neat lines were handwritten notes, different ink, different hands. Canaan squinted. What's it say? Arden read aloud. Blackouts spreading. People not themselves. Don't trust reflections. She turned the page. If they come, don't look at their eyes. They know when you recognize them. Her voice faltered. The next line had been pressed so hard the page tore. They finish what the city starts. Canaan's chest tightened. This is older than us, older than now. Arden nodded slowly. It means the overwrites didn't start yesterday. Maybe not even with Marrow. Maybe it's been building for decades. A sound echoed from the hallway. Both of them froze. Not footsteps. A shuffle like fabric dragged across the floor. Arden killed the flashlight. They sat in darkness, listening. The only light came from the small lantern flame flickering between them. The sound came again, closer. A dragging, patient motion. Canaan's skin prickled. He reached for the crowbar. Arden clutched the ledger to her chest. A shadow passed across the far wall. Not theirs. Too tall, too still. The lantern sputtered, guttered. For a heartbeat, the room plunged black. In that instant, Canaan swore he saw a figure crouched in the doorway, his own posture, his own outline. Then the lantern flared again. The doorway was empty. Arden's face had gone pale. She mouthed one word, run. They bolted, clutching the ledger, footsteps pounding through the Gazette's hollow halls. Cabinets rattled as though hands slammed them from inside. The portraits blurred as they passed, some of the scratched-out faces seeming whole again for a split second. At the front door, chains clattered behind them as though fastening shut. Canaan threw his shoulder into the door and burst through, tumbling into the plaza. The artificial dawn overhead wavered, strobing, half light, half dark. They didn't stop running until they reached the far end of the plaza, gasping for breath. Arden collapsed against a wall, clutching the ledger like scripture. Canaan bent double, hands on his knees. Tell me, it's worth it. Arden opened the ledger again, hands trembling. She flipped to the back pages. Ink had bled worse here, words warped with water damage, but she traced them carefully. Listen. Her voice was ragged. When the dawn falters, the city corrects. When the city corrects, the old selves are erased. If you see yourself in the dark, you've already been chosen. Canaan felt his stomach drop. He remembered the blackout in the bunker, the handprint. Arden turned the last page. The writing was frantic, nearly illegible. There is no outside. The dawn is the cage. The only exit is before the rewrite begins. She lowered the book. I don't know what that means. Canaan straightened, eyes scanning the empty streets. Maybe it means we're already too late. The blackout hit. This one didn't blink back. The plaza drowned in silence, the lantern in Arden's hand extinguished with a sigh. And in the dark, dozens of footsteps echoed around them. Not running, not hurried, just walking, all in perfect unison. Chapter 10, Reflections Break. The darkness wasn't empty. Canaan realized that the moment he tried to draw a breath when the lantern sputtered out. The plaza was swallowed by shadow, but it wasn't silent. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, moved around them. He could feel them before he heard them, vibrations through the ground, subtle but unmistakable. Arden clutched the ledger to her chest like a talisman, whispering under her breath, words he couldn't hear. "They're here," he murmured. "I know," she said, voice trembling. They backed toward the street, eyes straining to pierce the black. Then he saw it. Shapes, humanoid, standing still in impossible symmetry along the edges of the plaza. Not moving, not breathing. Or so it seemed. And yet, every instinct screamed they were alive and watching. Canaan's throat tightened. He knew one thing. This wasn't the first time they'd been followed in the dark, but this was the first time the copies had made themselves visible. "They know we see them," Arden whispered. "If we run, they'll—" A step, one single step from the nearest figure, perfectly timed with their own heartbeat. Canaan grabbed her arm. "We move now." They bolted. The plaza erupted with shadows. More copies emerged, slipping from the corners, folding out from doorways, even phasing through walls. It was impossible to tell which were real and which were the city's fabric, stitched into the black. Canaan swung the crowbar wildly, catching nothing but air. One of the figures mirrored him precisely, swinging in perfect opposition. A chill ran down his spine. They weren't attacking, they weren't fleeing, they were testing. "Don't let them box us in!" Arden shouted, yanking him toward a service alley. They ducked into the narrow passage, but it stretched longer than it should have. The walls seemed to breathe inward, closing, funneling them like the city itself had learned to channel them. He glanced back. Shadows shifted. The copies weren't running. They were sliding along the edges of the alley, encroaching silently, exactly one step behind, one step to the side. Every mirror image of himself, Arden, anyone they'd seen, now pressed against them like a tide of darkness. "We need to split," Arden hissed. "We can't stay together." Canaan shook his head. "Not without the ledger, if they get that." "They're already in our heads," she said. "If we split, maybe one of us can survive to tell what we found." He swallowed, chest burning. "Fine, but we meet at the canal, no matter what." Arden nodded, eyes darting for an escape route. She darted to the right, he went left. The alley swallowed them both. Canaan ran blind, the sound of footsteps behind him multiplying. Not one set, not two, but dozens. Each step a heartbeat synchronized to his own. He could feel the air thicken, shadows clinging to him, pressing. He rounded a corner into a service yard. Crates, dumpsters, and rusted vehicles offered sparse cover. He leapt behind a metal container, gasping for breath. His heart thundered in his ears, and then he saw it, himself. Standing upright, not running, not panicked, just standing, watching. Canaan froze. Every instinct screamed to bolt, but his legs refused. The double smiled, his smile precise, terrifyingly familiar. Then it raised a hand as if inviting him forward. A voice, his own, but layered, unnatural, echoed in his mind. "It's time to rest, time to leave nothing behind." He dropped to the ground, pressing against the rusted metal. His hands shook. "Not yet, not yet." Behind him, movement. Shadows peeled away from the walls, more doubles sliding forward. Their faces, eerily calm, were distorted in some impossible way, too perfect, too still, yet alive. Canaan scrambled, sprinted toward the canal, vaulting over debris. The echoes multiplied, duplicating each motion, so that even the air felt alive with his own mirrored steps. He reached the waterway, moonlight cutting faintly across its surface. The canal was a ribbon of silver, a rare untouched space in the city's rewrite. He gasped, inhaling the cool night air. And then a splash. Not his, not Arden's. Something else, something not there before, entered the water. The ripples spread, distortions forming, like a reflection attempting to escape its frame. Canaan froze, hearing voices whispered from the canal, fragments of himself, fragments of others. They repeated words he had never said out loud, memories that weren't his, phrases he didn't remember thinking. A double appeared at the edge of the water, stepping from shadow into faint moonlight. Its lips moved without sound, its eyes, his eyes, locked onto him. Canaan stumbled backward, falling to his knees. The canal reflected not him, but endless versions of himself, doubles and echoes layered like a nightmare stacked upon reality. And then a third sound joined the whispering, the scraping of boots, unmistakable. Arden. She made it, he whispered. Relief mixed with terror, but as he looked up, he saw her. Arden. Or something that wore her face perfectly, stepping out from the shadows behind him. Two of them, three, four, the real, the copies. He couldn't tell. The whispers intensified. Words coiled into commands in his head. Step forward, leave the ledger, merge, become the city. Canaan's hands clenched. He could feel the city's pulse in the shadows, the artificial dawn above blinking in sync with the rhythm in his chest. He didn't know if he could fight it, if he could run. He only knew one thing. If he stopped, he would vanish. And maybe, so would Arden. Chapter 11. Faces in the Dark. The canal was a ribbon of silver and shadow, reflecting a dozen versions of the city and as many versions of themselves. Canaan pressed his back against the concrete embankment, chest heaving, eyes darting across the trembling water. Each ripple seemed to carry 1,000 whispers. Arden was beside him, or at least someone wearing her face was. Her mouth moved silently as if speaking words only the city could hear. Canaan could no longer tell which was real, which was projection, which was something else entirely. He swallowed, hands shaking. We can't stay here. Then we run, Arden or her double said. The voice was hers, but hollow, filtered through a dozen echoes. They sprinted along the canal's edge. The city seemed to breathe around them, alleys twisting subtly, streets elongating or disappearing as if the pavement itself were alive. Each time he glanced back, doubles appeared, phasing from shadows with impossible timing. Some mimicked his exact movements, others anticipated them, stepping into the path he would take before he moved. Canaan stumbled over debris, crashing into a metal railing. One of the doubles caught his shoulder, but when he spun, there was nothing there, only the faint shimmer of heat, of reality bending. Keep moving, Arden shouted. She tugged him forward, boots slapping wet concrete. The whispers grew louder. They weren't words anymore. They were fragments of thought, commands layered over memories. Step forward, merge, leave nothing, become us. Canaan felt his own mind shiver. He couldn't tell which thoughts were his anymore. They turned a corner into a service alley. Piles of crates and rusted machinery offered a maze-like cover. Canaan darted behind one, heart hammering, ears straining. Then he heard it, footsteps matching his own, slow, deliberate, echoing his panic. He peeked around the crate. A figure stood there, himself. Not running, not panicked, just waiting. Its eyes gleamed in the low light. The copy tilted its head. His own mouth moved, shaping words he had not spoken aloud. You can't escape. Canaan's hands shook as he gripped the crowbar. I don't even know which one you are. The double smiled faintly, Does it matter? Arden grabbed him, pulling him behind another stack of crates. Stop thinking about them like people, she hissed. They aren't alive. They're the city. Everything they touch becomes nothing. A flash of motion caught Canaan's eye. More doubles slipping between shadows, folding into alleys, creeping closer with unnatural grace. Their synchronization was perfect, movements fluid and eerily calm. One stepped into a pool of water. The reflection shimmered, not like liquid but like a screen buffering, pixels rearranging. Canaan's stomach churned. He realized the city wasn't just replacing people, it was editing the environment itself. Do you see it? He whispered. Arden nodded. Every time the lights flicker, every time the blackout hits, it rewrites everything. Streets, buildings, people, memories too. A sudden thought struck him. The ledger, the printouts, they're immune. Analog survives the rewrite. Exactly. Arden's voice was fierce. If we get the evidence out, the city can't erase it. But before they could move, a double lunged, not attacking, simply stepping in front of Canaan, blocking the narrow alleyway. Its eyes locked on his, and for a moment he felt himself slipping. Panic, doubt, the gnawing sensation that he wasn't real anymore. Arden swung the crowbar, connecting solidly with the double's chest. It faltered, blinked. Then, nothing. No collapse, no scream. The figure simply stood, unchanged, as if the strike had never happened. They can't be destroyed, Arden breathed, backing up. Only outrun or outsmarted. Canaan's pulse throbbed. Outsmarted how? They anticipate everything. Arden's hand went to her satchel. The archives analog feed. If we can reach a transmitter, the city can't rewrite what we broadcast. He swallowed, nodding. Then we go, now. They sprinted down the alley, weaving through debris over puddles. Shadows stretched unnaturally, doubles phasing into their periphery. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. Suddenly, Canaan tripped, lantern flying from Arden's hands, shattering against concrete. Darkness swallowed them. Breath rasped, the whispers swelled, commands drilled into his skull. Merge, become us, leave nothing. And then he felt hands, his hands, clasping his shoulders, multiple layered, pressing, suffocating. He screamed, yanking free, spinning. Nothing, just shadow, just air. Arden's voice pierced the panic. The transmitter! Somewhere ahead, a faint glow winked through the darkness. He didn't know how far, didn't know if it was real. He only ran. When they reached the room, they found a small control console, humming with power. Arden fumbled through cables, feeding in the ledger's contents through a patch line. Data, images, everything analog they could salvage, now streaming. The whispers rose to a crescendo, voices overlapping in a terrible choir. Canaan clutched his head. Doubles appeared at every exit, pacing, waiting. Do it, he shouted. Arden slammed the final switch. Screens flickered, projecting the ledger's feed to every corner of the city grid. The doubles froze, their mouths opened, forming silent screams. Then they wavered, glitches running across their bodies. Not destroyed, but disoriented. For the first time in hours, Canaan could breathe. The city throbbed, pulsing, as if it had been holding itself together and now wavered. In the darkness beyond the windows, the shadows shifted, fewer now, flickering in and out. Arden sank to the floor, exhausted. It worked. For now. Canaan leaned against the console, listening to the city hum, a soft, low vibration that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. For now, he echoed. He glanced at the canal outside where reflections had seemed endless, infinite. Do you think anyone else survived? Arden shook her head. Doesn't matter. Not yet. What matters is that we proved it. They can't rewrite everything. Canaan closed his eyes for a moment, a lull in the chaos, a brief pause between heartbeats. The city was still alive, still rewriting, still hungry, but they had left a mark, analog, unbreakable. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Chapter 12. When the city breathes, the city was alive. Not metaphorically, not in the sense of blinking neon or humming generators. It breathed, and every inhale dragged the shadows deeper. Every exhale shifted streets and walls, altering angles, twisting alleys, and folding corridors into impossible geometry. The overwrites had sensed the ledger's intrusion. They were angry, reorganizing the world around Canaan and Arden like a living organism trying to crush a foreign infection. Canaan stumbled through the corridors of a building they'd barely entered, dust kicking up around his boots, echoing down hallways that curved in ways that made no sense. He clutched the crowbar, heart hammering, sweat stinging his eyes. Behind him, footsteps multiplied, not one set, not two, but dozens. His own echoing footsteps intertwined with shadows that weren't his, each step mocking him, copying him, predicting him. Arden ran beside him, or a version of her did. He wasn't sure which. Every time he looked at her, her face flickered. Sometimes the real Arden, resolute, commanding, fierce. Other times a shadow Arden, eyes hollow, movements perfect, inhuman. "Over here," she shouted, voice echoing unnaturally in the elongated corridor. She led him through a stairwell that twisted upward like a spiral thrown into the wrong dimension. The artificial dawn from the upper levels bled weakly through cracks in the concrete, strobing intermittently. It made everything shimmer, made the doubles flicker, like television static. Canaan's mind screamed for a moment of clarity, a second to breathe. He couldn't find one. Every door they passed contained movement, copies of themselves waiting in the dark. Faces warped, stretching slightly before snapping back, eyes glinting with a hollow hunger. "They know every move we make," he guessed, voice cracking. Arden didn't respond, only pressed forward. Her boots pounded the steps, boots synchronized with something he couldn't see, the city itself adjusting to anticipate their actions. The stairwell ended abruptly, spilling them onto a balcony that overlooked the central plaza. Canaan froze. The ledger, now packed into Arden's satchel, throbbed like it had its own heartbeat. Below, the city shifted. The plaza, familiar just hours ago, had become alien. Buildings stretched impossibly tall, windows reflecting an endless multiplicity of themselves. Streets twisted, looping back on each other, alleys disappearing and reforming in real time. And there, at the center of it all, hundreds of figures, copies, doubles, facsimiles of anyone they had seen, paced, waiting, watching. "Do you see it?" Arden whispered. Her voice was trembling, but she didn't stop. "They're organizing." Canaan's stomach turned. "They're strategizing." Not strategizing, aligning. They're the city. Everything it rewrites forms into purpose. They're a single organism now. A shadow detached itself from the crowd. Not a shadow in the literal sense, but a double. One of his own, stepping forward with deliberate calm. Its lips moved, but no sound came out. Canaan's own mind supplied the words, terrifyingly accurate. "You can't hide, you can't run, you can't leave a trace." He raised the crowbar, hand shaking. The double mirrored him, every motion exact but slightly faster, perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Arden," he whispered, "we can't fight them." She shook her head. "No, we can't. We have to outsmart them." "How?" Her eyes darted toward the transmission hub they had passed earlier. "We need to broadcast the ledger to every feed at once, all sectors, every analog channel, every street-level monitor. The city can overwrite digital but not analog, not physical proof. If we can flood it, we disrupt its control." Canaan nodded. "Then we do it, but we'll need to move fast." The doubles surged forward, breaking from their placid formation. They didn't run, didn't stagger. They glided with inhuman precision. The echoes of footsteps multiplied, surrounding them, circling, closing the gap. Canaan swung the crowbar again, catching nothing but air. Each time he moved, a shadow matched him, a whisper echoing in his mind. Step left, step right, block the path, merge. Arden grabbed his arm. Over here, the control room. They darted down a side corridor that twisted unnaturally, leading them to a maintenance hub filled with old servers and tangled cables. The hum of electricity vibrated through the floor. Cables snaked across the room like veins, pulsing with the city's rhythm. Arden dropped the satchel and began feeding pages into an improvised scanner. Ink blurred as if alive, the mechanical rollers dragging each sheet through, digitizing it for broadcast. Canaan stayed near the door, swinging the crowbar at shadows that phased into the hallway. Each strike passed through something, air, darkness, reflections, but the presence of the doubles pressed closer, an invisible wall pushing them inward. "They're learning," he panted. "Every second we're here, they're learning." Arden's hands flew over the controls. "I know, I can feel it, just hold them off a little longer." The first double stepped into the room, unfazed by the door. Not moving, but present. Its reflection shimmered in the glass monitor like a glitching screen. Canaan raised the crowbar, swung with all his strength. The double jerked aside, not struck, but their combined air shifted violently, knocking him back. Dust exploded from vents, cables snapped. The whispers intensified, words layered over words. Leave, merge, join, obey. Arden screamed, hitting the final sequence on the scanner. The ledger's contents began transmitting. Analog signals pulsed through wires that snaked out of the room, feeding old street monitors, abandoned cameras, even outdated service lines that still fed into the city grid. The doubles faltered, their movements stuttered, halting mid-step. Some blinked, faces flickering like corrupted code. Others simply froze, hovering in the air as if tethered by invisible strings. The city shuddered, buildings twisted and snapped in half a heartbeat, alleys reforming, streets straightening, then curving back. Shadows wavered, dissipating briefly before reforming at a distance. Canaan staggered to Arden's side. "Is it working?" She nodded, chest heaving. "For now, it's slowing them, but it won't hold forever." From outside, the city moaned, a deep vibration that resonated in their bones. The overwrites were recoiling, reorganizing, recalculating, and then, as if noticing the two humans defying it, the doubles surged again, this time faster, more coordinated. "Another wave," Arden muttered. "We need to escape now." Canaan grabbed her hand. "We go together. We leave the building, no stopping." They bolted through the maintenance corridors. The city bent around them, doors leading to nowhere, staircases folding into themselves. Doubles emerged at every turn, perfectly timed to cut them off, but each glance backward confirmed the ledger was still transmitting. The analog signals were holding, even if barely. Outside, the streets twisted into impossible loops. Reflections danced on shattered glass, showing them walking paths they hadn't taken. Canaan's mind struggled to reconcile what was real. Every breath felt borrowed, every heartbeat borrowed, every movement predicted. The doubles pressed closer. He swung the crowbar at a copy of himself that lunged, but the blow passed harmlessly through shadow. The whispers screamed, "Step forward, leave nothing, become us." Arden yanked him into an alley that led to the old industrial sector, far from central grids. The city's pulse was weaker here, the artificial dawn flickering like dying embers. The doubles were still behind, but slowed, disrupted by the analog broadcast. Canaan leaned against a wall, shaking. We did it?" Arden shook her head, catching her breath. "For now. But the city is still alive, still rewriting, and we've only just begun to understand the rules." The distant hum of the overwrites faded slightly, but in the stillness, Canaan realized the horror wasn't over. It would never be over, not fully. The city's breath would always reach them, always watch them, always wait for the moment they faltered. But for now, they had survived, and they had left proof. The ledger pulsed faintly in Arden's satchel. like a heartbeat that refused to be erased. And for the first time in hours, Canaan allowed himself to hope. Chapter 13. The Last Reflection. The city had stopped pretending. It no longer flickered gently, no longer whispered behind the walls. Every shadow, every corner, every reflective surface pulsed with awareness. The overwrites had sensed the ledger, the analog broadcast, the intrusion of proof. And now they were coming for the source, Canaan, Arden, the pages that had defied the city's erasure. Canaan sprinted through the industrial sector, boots slapping wet concrete, lungs burning. Behind him, the whispers became footsteps, then a chorus, then a deafening tide of mirrored voices. Every step, every turn was anticipated, every path ahead folded back on itself, as if the city's geometry had become alive, trapping them in an inescapable puzzle. Arden ran beside him, or a version of her did. He couldn't tell which one was real anymore. In the streetlights, every movement cast dozens of shadows, and some of those shadows moved independently. Some had faces, faces of themselves, twisted just enough to make them unrecognizable, yet perfect copies in every subtle detail. "The bridge," Arden gasped. "We get to the canal bridge, old transmission hub. There's an emergency line we can use." Canaan nodded, adrenaline making him numb. They dashed through alleys, ducking under scaffolding, vaulting over debris. The doubles pursued relentlessly, but here, the analog signal had begun to create interference. Not enough to stop them entirely, but enough to slow the perfect synchronization of the copies. Suddenly, a wall shifted. A street folded in on itself, compressing into a dead end. Canaan skidded to a halt, heart hammering. Around him, the doubles closed in, his own face, Arden's face, even faces of people they had only glimpsed through memories or news clips, all coalescing into a single suffocating mass. "They're faster now," Arden shouted, yanking him sideways. "They adapt. Every second counts." He swung the crowbar at one of the doubles, lunging at him. It passed harmlessly through a chest that wasn't flesh but shadow, but the act gave them a narrow corridor to escape. They dove into it, turning sharply onto an elevated catwalk above the canal. The bridge came into view, rusted metal railings, dangling cables, flickering lights. Yet it was intact, a single path across the void of water below, an artery leading to the last old transmission hub in the city. Canaan didn't pause to admire it. He sprinted, Arden at his heels, but halfway across the shadows converged. Doubles slipped from every surface, walls, water, even reflections in the glassed-over canal. One of his own lunged, and he barely sidestepped, crowbar connecting with air again. A whisper cut into his mind, sharp and articulate. "Leave the ledger. Join us. Become the city." He swallowed hard. "Never," he thought, and shoved forward. Arden skittered beside him, dropping the satchel onto the metal planks. "We have to push it into the hub." Canaan grabbed the bag, pulling the pages toward the access hatch. The doubles surged closer, phasing through space like water, gliding with unnatural precision. For a heartbeat, Canaan saw the city's rewrite take form, the bridge bending in impossible angles, railings extending and curling like tendrils, water below glowing with phosphorescent distortion. He slammed the bag into the hatch. Arden hit the lever to engage the emergency connection. Sparks flew. Lights flickered, and a wave of analog signals coursed outward. Screens, monitors, old cables, every channel that could carry information flickered to life, broadcasting the ledger's pages citywide. The doubles faltered, glitches running across their forms, faces twitched, movements stuttered, the city's pulse trembled. Canaan fell to his knees, chest heaving. Arden dropped beside him, both staring at the chaos below. The bridge had warped, doubled over itself. Shadows writhed in midair, faces flickering between perfect copies and corrupted shapes. The overwrites recoiled, but the city wasn't done. The double surged again, faster, more coordinated, drawn by instinct toward the source of the threat, the analog signal, the ledger, the defiance. Canaan felt one brush past him, fingers icy, a perfect mirror's touch. He stumbled forward, tripping, and found himself on his back at the edge of the bridge. Arden grabbed his arm. "Hold on, we finish this now." Canaan looked at her, or the Arden he hoped was real. She nodded, determination carved deep into her face. Together, they pushed the last of the ledger's pages into the hub. A hum rose, deep and resonant, unlike anything in the city. The air thickened, the shadows froze mid-step. The whispers screamed and layered over themselves until they became a dissonant roar. And then silence. Not complete, but weighted. The doubles froze entirely, mid-motion, faces twitching like corrupted code. The city's pulse slowed, quivering as though it had been struck. Lights stuttered, flickering between artificial dawn and pitch black, then steadied, just enough to see. Canaan and Arden collapsed, breathing hard, drenched in sweat. Around them, the overwrites had retreated, not vanished, but paused. The analog broadcast held, anchoring the ledger in a reality the city could not rewrite. They dared to look at each other. Arden reached for his hand, squeezing it. For a fleeting second, the city seemed distant, like a nightmare dissolving in the morning sun. "Did we," Canaan began, voice hoarse, "actually win?" Arden shook her head slowly. "Not win, survive. That's all we can do. The city—" She gestured at the twisted, glimmering skyline. "It's still alive, still watching, still rewriting. But at least now there's proof, evidence." A ripple in the water caught their attention. Shadows stirred, form shifting. Canaan knew without speaking that the city's hunger had not ended. The doubles were still there, waiting for the moment to resume, patient, infinite, inexorable. He exhaled sharply, letting the moment last. The ledger pulsed faintly in Arden's satchel, a fragile heartbeat against a city that would otherwise erase them completely. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "We keep going tomorrow. We stay ahead, we stay alive, we expose everything." Canaan nodded. The artificial dawn above flickered once more, steadying, casting long shadows that no longer mirrored them perfectly. For now. For now, they had survived the overwrite. For now, they had left a mark the city could not erase. And even if the shadows waited, even if the doubles copied every move they made, even if the city never truly slept, they had hope. And hope, fragile as it was, had never been a line the city could overwrite. Canaan looked out across the glittering, distorted skyline. Reflections flickered, faces in every window, every puddle, every glass pane. The city breathed, alive and hungry, but they had survived the night, and that night would not last forever. The last page of the ledger, safely secured in Arden's satchel, caught a stray beam of artificial dawn. It gleamed faintly, a reminder, a warning, a promise. The city could try to rewrite them again, but they would resist. Because some reflections refused to break.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay safe.